A Knoxville woman has taken her neighbor to court over an illegal trench dug in her backyard for a neighbor's sewer line. WAT 6 Underside consumer reporter Don Dare says the trench has left a mess in her yard.
It certainly has, Don, and the long and deep trench was dug 10 months ago. Linda Riddle lives in a house built about 90 years ago, and the sewer line from her house to the city connection was worn out. So she took out a permit and hired a licensed plumber to replace her system in November of last year. Then in February of this year, her neighbor had a trench cut through her yard and connected to her sewer without her permission. This is what Linda Riddle's backyard has looked like for 10 months. There's a 3.5-foot deep and nearly 40-foot long trench running through the middle of it. The person who did the work was
unlicensed. Did not have a permit to do this, nor permission to come through my yard.
The trench was dug while she was at work in early February of this year. She says her neighbor had the job done without her approval. The city sewer runs alongside Linda's house, not in front of her place. The man who owns a rental house next door asked for an easement across Linda's yard to access the sewer because the old clay pipes in his yard had broken. Mrs. Riddle offered to let her neighbor run the sewer across the back of her yard, not through it.
She didn't give them permission. In fact, she expressly told them not to do it. She told them they could do it over there by that tree.
Bennett Hirshhorn, Linda's attorney, has taken her neighbor to court. In a lawsuit, Mrs. Riddle claims her neighbor illegally trespassed and dug a trench in her property. She claims no permit was pulled to lay a sewer line and connect it to her line. She claims there's no sewer easement in the middle of her yard, and she claims the plumber who did the work was not licensed, but city codes require a license. This pipe is called a sewer cleanout. It connects a home's plumbing system to the public sewer. The one in Mrs. Riddle's yard is new because her old line needed to be repaired. She hired a licensed plumber and took out a permit in November of last year to build a new connection in her backyard.
So normally people would be able to just go from their house to the front street, but this property behind us doesn't have access to a sewer by the front street. They actually have to come back behind the houses into the alley.
And not through her backyard.
They should not come through the backyard.
The city of Knoxville issued a stop work order in mid-February. Codes says the connection was performed without proof of an easement across Mrs. Riddle's property, that the plumber who did the work was unlicensed. The city says until there's a resolution, the work permit is denied.
You want to make sure nobody's walking out on here.
Mrs. Riddle's attorney advises her to keep maintaining the bright orange fence that surrounds the deep trench so passersby are not injured. Mrs. Riddle has declined a settlement offer from her neighbor's attorney, saying it did not cover all her expenses and compensation. While her new sewer system works, the case has been tied up in court for months, and Linda's yard remains a mess.
That's what my backyard is. I wonder where I could use it for my enjoyment.
Now, because of pending litigation, the attorney representing Mrs. Riddle's neighbor did not want to comment beyond saying he and his client did offer Mrs. Riddle financial settlement, but it was declined. However, in the lawsuit, Mrs. Riddle's neighbor claimed he believes there is an easement, that it exists, and he had the right to run his line in the middle of her yard. But as you heard Mrs. Riddle say, she never gave permission to anyone to tear up her yard. The case will be heard sometime in the new year. Don?
Wow, just wow. All right, if you have a consumer question for Don, you can send him an email at ddare@wate.com. You can also give him a call, leave a message, 865-633-6923.